Imagine for a moment the following scenario. Night has fallen. The cold wind slips through the cracks of a small wooden house. Inside, an entire family is gathered in a single room. The only light comes from a weak fire in the center of the room. The flames crackle slowly, while shadows dance on the walls. A child is already asleep in the mother's lap. The father closes his eyes after a full day of work in the fields. Outside, the world has disappeared. No lamps, no lit streets, no help. Medieval darkness was not just the absence of light. It was a territory of death. Because in the Middle Ages, most people did not fear the day. The real fear began when the sun disappeared, when doors were barred with pieces of wood, when the fire had to stay lit all night long, when any noise outside could mean thieves, wolves, or something worse. And the most frightening part? Many people went to sleep believing they would wake up the next day, but never opened their eyes again. Entire families were found charred inside their own homes. Others simply never woke up, suffocated by the invisible smoke that built up during the early hours. And in some villages, when the sun rose, doors were opened to reveal something even more disturbing. Completely silent houses, no movement, no survivors. For centuries, priests said the end of the world would come with trumpets and fire from the sky. But for thousands of people in medieval Europe, the apocalypse arrived in a much simpler way. It arrived while they slept. And the most curious thing of all is that these horrors did not remain only in history. They gave rise to the horror tales we still tell children today. Stories about creatures that attack at night, shadows that enter homes, monsters that appear when everyone is asleep. But here is what almost no one realizes. These stories did not come from imagination. They came from reality. In this video, you will discover why the medieval night was one of the most dangerous times in human history, why even kings were afraid to sleep, and what really happened during the darkest hours between sunset and dawn. But before we continue, if you like stories that reveal the most disturbing side of human history, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel now. We are going to reveal something that seems impossible. Medieval Europe experienced a period of enormous prosperity and growth, but ironically, it was exactly that progress that turned the night into the deadliest moment in any person's life. And when you understand how people really slept back then, you might realize that surviving until dawn was in itself already a victory. Now take a deep breath, because what happened after the sun set was even worse. To understand why the night was so dangerous, we first need to look at what happened during the day. Because, contrary to what many imagine, medieval Europe was not just misery and decay. For several centuries, especially between the years 1000 and 1300, the continent experienced an impressive period of growth. Historians call this moment the medieval warm period. Temperatures were a little warmer, crops thrived, the population grew rapidly, new villages appeared in places where there had only been forests before, markets were crowded, medieval fairs attracted merchants from distant regions, giant cathedrals began to rise on city horizons, structures so tall they seemed to challenge the sky itself. Castles multiplied, trade routes expanded. Cities like Paris, Florence, and London grew at a rapid pace. During the day, the medieval world was alive, noisy, and full of activity. Blacksmiths hammered red-hot metal, peasants harvested wheat in the fields, merchants shouted offers at fairs. But there was one silent detail that almost no one noticed. All this prosperity was being built with extremely dangerous materials. Most houses were made of wood, the roofs were covered with dry thatch, and in the center of almost every home there was a fire that stayed lit practically all the time. There were no lit streets, there were no public lanterns, there were no firefighters, and most importantly, there was no police patrolling the night. When the sun disappeared below the horizon, something almost primitive happened. Society simply shut down. Doors were closed, windows were boarded up, urban life came to a complete halt. Darkness took over the streets, and at that moment a strange balance began to emerge. Historians call it a kind of Malthusian nighttime equilibrium. During the day there was order, but during the night, authority practically vanished. Without light, without surveillance, and without real protection, the streets turned into free territory for thieves, invaders, and any kind of danger. It was as if two realities existed in the same place, one during the day, Another completely different when the sun set. Europe was growing, cities were full, houses were packed with families, but no one noticed a terrifying truth. The more people slept together in fragile, flammable, and completely dark structures, the greater the chance became that something terrible would happen while everyone was asleep. Medieval Europe was full of life, full of hope, and full of people who still did not know that on many nights. Death arrived silently while they slept. Now imagine the exact moment when the sun disappeared below the horizon. There were no streetlights turning on. There were no lanterns lighting the streets. The medieval night fell brutally. In just a few minutes, entire cities plunged into near total darkness. Inside the houses, the only source of light continued to be the fire. And this is where one of the most silent dangers in human history begins. Many houses did not have chimneys. The smoke from the hearth simply accumulated inside the room and slowly escaped through small openings in the roof. During the day, this was merely uncomfortable. But at night, when everyone slept with doors and windows closed, the smoke and carbon monoxide began to build up. Silently, without a strong smell, without warning. Entire families could simply fall asleep and never wake up again. And that was just one of the risks. The fire that warmed the houses could also destroy everything in a matter of minutes. Thatch roofs were extremely flammable. A single spark could turn an entire house into a torch. And the worst part is that when the fire started, people were sleeping. When they woke up, it was often too late. But the danger was not limited to inside the houses. Outside, the streets became deadly traps. Candles were expensive and rare. Torches were dangerous to carry. Most people simply avoided going out after dark. Anyone who needed to walk the streets did so practically blind. Holes in the ground, loose animals, thieves hidden in dark alleys. Anything could happen. And then another type of danger emerged, a psychological one. Entire families stayed gathered in a single dark room. No distractions, no street noise, no guarantee of safety whatsoever. The only thing they could do was listen. The creaking of wood, the wind beating against the walls, distant footsteps outside. On many nights, no one really slept deeply. People just closed their eyes, hoping nothing would happen until dawn, because everyone knew something that was rarely said out loud. If something went wrong during the early hours, no one would come to help. And in many medieval winters, when the cold was brutal and the nights seemed endless, it only took one single night for hell to begin. A night like those of 1315 or 1348, or any other silent early morning of the Middle Ages. When the medieval night arrived, power, wealth, and social status lost much of their meaning, because darkness made no distinction. The same danger that stalked a peasant's hut could also strike noble houses and even castles. Monastic records from the time describe terrifying scenes that repeated across entire villages, fires that started in the middle of the night and spread in minutes. Wooden houses built right next to each other turned into fuel for the flames. In a short time, entire streets were ablaze. Many families did not even have time to react. Some were found days later, still in their beds. In certain accounts, chroniclers describe villages where the smell of smoke lingered in the air for weeks, and fire was just one of the dangers. Inside homes, silent suffocation was equally common. Without proper ventilation, hearth smoke turned the environment into an invisible trap. People fell asleep, breathed slowly for hours, until the body simply stopped. No screams, no struggle, just silence. But while some died inside their homes, others faced even more direct dangers. Thieves knew that night was the perfect time to strike. With no street lighting and no organized patrols, break-ins were frequent. In certain judicial records of the time, disturbing descriptions appear. Intruders silently entering homes while everyone slept, stealing food, tools, or anything of value. In more violent situations, victims simply had no chance. Darkness favored those who attacked. And it wasn't just humans that posed a threat. In rural areas, wolves frequently approached villages during winter, hungry and drawn by the smell of animals and food scraps. There are records of villages where fragile doors were forced open during the early hours, chicken coops destroyed, animals taken, and sometimes something even more frightening. The combination of all these factors created a brutal reality. Sunrise did not always mean relief. On many medieval mornings, people woke up to discover that someone in the village simply had not survived the night. Chronicles from the time suggest something striking. A significant portion of deaths considered natural occurred precisely between sunset and dawn, while everyone slept, while no one could help. In that world, surviving the day was only half the battle. The other half it happened in the darkness. Over time, fear of the night began to shape people's behavior, not just because of the physical threat, but because of what it revealed about human nature itself. When darkness covered entire villages and everyone retreated into their fragile homes, something deeper happened. The survival instinct spoke louder. In times of famine and scarcity, something common in various periods of the Middle Ages, stories began to appear in documents and local chronicles. Tales of people stealing food from neighbors during the early hours, silently entering homes while families slept, taking sacks of grain, pieces of bread, anything that could keep someone alive for one more day. But the stories did not always end with just theft. Some medieval prison records report dark episodes that occurred at night. Prisoners confined for long periods, extreme hunger, bodies that could not endure, and when desperation reached its limit, certain moral boundaries began to disappear. These accounts were rare, but sufficient to feed the collective fear that something deeply disturbing happened when the world slept. At the same time, domestic tragedies left deep emotional scars on communities. Parents waking up in the middle of the night and realizing the air inside the house was too heavy. Children who did not respond. Entire families destroyed by a fire that started with a simple spark. These traumatic experiences accumulated generation after generation. And slowly, they began to turn into stories. Stories told around the fire. Warnings for children not to go out at night. Narratives about creatures that appeared when everyone was asleep. It was in this environment that many of the tales we know today were born. Stories of children abandoned in the forest at night, like in Hansel and Gretel. Legends about witches approaching houses when everything was dark. Creatures that prowled silent villages, waiting for the moment to strike. These stories had a purpose. They were a way to explain the unexplainable, to turn real dangers into understandable monsters, because admitting the full truth was far more terrifying. The truth was that, very often, the danger did not come from supernatural creatures, nor from demons, nor from monsters hidden in the shadows. The phrase that silently echoed in many people's minds was even more disturbing. The real monster was not under the bed. It could be inside the house itself. When the sun finally rose on the medieval horizon, illuminating the fields and silent villages, many people breathed a sigh of relief. One more night had passed. One more early morning had been conquered. But not everyone had the same luck. Doors were opened slowly. Neighbors called to one another from outside the houses. And sometimes no one answered. On some mornings the smell of smoke still hung in the air. On others an entire family simply did not wake up. These repeated experiences, night after night, generation after generation, left deep marks on the people of that time. Modern archaeologists and historians find clear signs of this. Medieval skeletons often show evidence of chronic physical stress, bodies that lived in a constant state of alert, people who slept poorly, who lived in fear, because, for a medieval peasant, sleeping was never completely safe. And from that fear, many customs that still exist today were born. The tradition of leaving a candle burning at night, the creation of the first night watchman, men who walked the streets trying to maintain some kind of surveillance while everyone slept, superstitions about protecting the house before going to bed, small rituals that had a single goal, to survive until dawn. And then, in the 14th century, something even worse happened. The Black Death began to spread across Europe. A population that already lived under nights of fear, stress, and precarious living conditions now faced one of the greatest catastrophes in history. Millions died. But the fear of the night, that had existed long before the plague arrived. And perhaps that is why, even today, there is something deeply instinctive inside us. Even living in safe houses, with electric lights and with locked doors and with lit cities, many people still feel a strange discomfort when the house becomes completely dark. Perhaps because somewhere deep in human memory, there still echoes a time when night meant real danger. A time when closing your eyes required courage. Today we believe that sleeping is one of the safest things we can do. But it only takes a power outage, an unexpected fire, or a strange silence in the middle of the night to realize something our ancestors knew very well. Civilization is, very often, just a lit lamp. And when the light disappears, the world can become far more fragile than we imagine. If this story changed the way you look at your own bed today, share this video. Because understanding the past is not just curiosity. Sometimes, it is the only way to remember how easily safety can disappear when night falls.